Now, one of the most important concepts when dealing with data binding to entities and data objects, where you're building a rich interactive UI around those objects, is property and collection change notifications. Basically, change notifications are going to be necessary if those source object properties that you're binding to, or the collections, can be modified by any other code other than the binding itself. So this includes things like if you go out and do an asynchronous service call to load some data into your UI's memory space, you're going to end up setting properties or populating collections behind the scenes after the UI has already rendered and the XAML has been parsed. Another scenario is if you have a command or event handler in code, and that reaches out and modifies the data source object for another control. And certainly if you have any background threads or things going on in the background that are modifying your data objects, that's another source where things are going to change behind the scenes, not directly from user input through the bound control. In any of these scenarios, you're going to need property or collection change notifications to make sure that the UI stays fresh. Because if there's no notification, the UI is going to continue to show the value that was in the source property at the initial binding, at the point where the XAML was parsed. So to keep that UI fresh and in sync with the data source object, the data source object has to raise change notifications to tell the binding in the UI, hey, come and read my value again because it's changed. Now, when it comes to supporting property level change notifications, you really have two options. The first is to support the iNotifyPropertyChanged interface, which I'll often call INPC for short, based on the capitals in that name. iNotifyPropertyChanged is a simple interface with a single member on it called PropertyChanged, an event that you're supposed to raise whenever the properties on your object change. Bindings are aware of this interface, and when they go to data bind to a source object, they will query it to see if it supports this interface. And if it does, then the binding itself will subscribe to that property changed event so it can be notified and refresh the bound property if that property changed event indicates that that property has changed. The other option you have is to use dependency properties. If your source object inherits from dependency object as a base class, and the properties that it's exposing that you're binding to are dependency properties, there's an internal mechanism that can raise change notifications to bindings so that they know to refresh. So let's look a little deeper at the first of these, doing iNotifyPropertyChanged. Basically what you're going to do is implement that interface on your data object class. So this is going to be your entity class that you're using as a data source object. In addition to declaring that interface on the class definition itself, you're going to expose a public event with the signature of public event property changed event handler and give that event the name property changed. Once you've defined that event, you're going to be responsible for raising that event in each of your property setters on that object, but you should generally check and see that the value being set is not the value that's already there, and not raise the event if the setter is being called with the current value. So let's take a look at a demo of implementing iNotifyPropertyChange and how it syncs up our UI better for the demo scenarios we've been covering.